stupefying, shocking. It's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable. Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done.
No wonder Mark Carney bolted for another photo op trip. While he was smiling for cameras abroad, his own parliamentary budget officer dropped a nuclear bomb on the Liberal narrative, absolutely shredding the myth that Carney is some sort of financial genius and exposing the truth. This government hasn't changed its spending habits one bit. In fact, Canada's fiscal path is now headed straight for oblivion. Let's take a look.
In figure 1 of your report, you no longer predict the debt to GDP ratio improving. In fact, it would appear that what was once a fiscal anchor has now been abandoned by this Prime Minister and his government, as your report indicates the debt to GDP increasing to a clearly alarming rate of 42.5%. So my questions are these. Is this sustainable? At what point does it hit a critical point? And should Canadians be concerned?
To answer, I think, the most important part of the question first, I think everybody should be concerned. My jokes aside, it's a really serious day, right? This is the first time in 30 years that we've tabled an economic and fiscal outlook where the fiscal anchor of the general and probably most important fiscal anchor for any government is a declining or at least stable debt to GDP ratio. And this is the first time in 30 years that I've seen one in which that ratio is going up over time. So that's definitely a cause for concern. Certainly on our end, we're hoping and certainly expecting the government, as part of Budget 2025, to clearly indicate what the government plans to do to address this and potentially address this problem, because it's certainly not sustainable.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Jason Jake. He is the interim parliamentary budget officer, and he's worked in the parliamentary budget office for 17 years. So this isn't some new guy that has come in and doesn't really know the ropes. He's prepared report after report. He's been involved in it. He's seen it. He's seen conservative governments. He's seen the Liberal government. And if you recall, one of the things that Chrystia Freeland kept crowing about in the last parliament to try to, combat the narrative from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives that they were leading Canada down a very dangerous financial path was, we have a great debt to GDP ratio. We have a AAA credit rating.
Lowest debt to GDP ratio.
Lowest debt to GDP ratio.
Lowest debt to GDP ratio. Lowest debt to GDP ratio. Lowest debt to GDP ratio.
Lowest debt to GDP ratio. Best debt to GDP ratio.
Well, now the PBO is saying your debt to GDP ratio is going up. That means, folks, the amount of debt that the country is carrying is growing. So the ratio between that and the actual gross domestic product, the amount we basically produce, that is shrinking. So the amount of debt that we're getting is getting closer to the amount that we actually produce. That is very, very problematic for any nation, never mind Canada. And the fact that he says we haven't seen this in over 30 years, that means that we haven't seen this since the mid-90s, which was a big, big, big problem for Canada, for those who remember. So He's not mincing any words. This is a concern. This is not a conservative, folks. This is someone who works in the Parliamentary Budget Office for the Liberal government.
Do you think it's important to take a look at Table 2 here, and for people back home, as of 2024-25, the public debt charges is $53.6 billion, and that projection is going to increase in 2030 to $82.4 billion. Is that sustainable?
So before we get his answer, folks, and for those playing the home game, this is Table 2 from the Parliamentary Budget Office report. So what is he talking about? He is talking about line 3 there, where it says public debt charges, $53.6 billion. And if you move all the way to the right, the estimate by 2030-31 is that is going to increase to $82.4 billion. Now, what does that mean? We all hear about debt service charges. What is that? So when you and I take out a loan, we take out a loan from the bank, and what ends up happening is that we take out that money and then we get charged interest on that, right? Right. So we pay interest every month. Now, this is a little different. When the government borrows money, it doesn't really borrow money from the Bank of Canada per se. What it does is it goes to the Bank of Canada and says, hey, we need money. So what the Bank of Canada does is the Bank of Canada prepares bonds, and it sells those bonds to financial institutions and investors. So most of those bonds end up going to the Canadian banks like RBC and Scotia and the rest of them. So the banks buy the bonds, that brings the money in, and in most cases the banks are creating money out of thin air. They're printing money to actually raise the capital for that, and then that goes to the Bank of Canada, which then gets transferred to the Government of Canada. Fine. So what's this debt service charge? Well, why do these banks buy these bonds? They wouldn't buy them if it wasn't in their best interest, right? Right. So what ends up happening is the government actually gives an interest payment, or almost like a dividend payment to these financial institutions. So you get paid that interest rate from the federal government just for giving them money to hold this bond. So this means that the Government of Canada doesn't exactly owe the Bank of Canada, it owes all of these different financial institutions. Okay, that explains how all this money gets into the economy. The trouble is if interest rates go up, guess what happens? Those debt servicing payments to the bondholders, those go up also. So if you remember way back when Justin Trudeau had said, we're borrowing money, as in the Canadian government, we're borrowing money so you don't have to. That was when the interest rates were really, really low. And that's where he said, interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn. And then the interest rates skyrocketed. So did the debt servicing charges. So the issue here is that in that table, you see the interest or the debt servicing charges almost double by 2030. That's not because of interest rates, folks. That's because of how much Mark Carney intends to borrow. And the question is what happens if those interest rates go up? Then the debt servicing fee skyrockets. And this is a major, major red flag for this whole model.
We also see that the debt servicing ratio is increasing over the projection horizon. So every dollar spent on debt is a dollar that is not spent elsewhere. As Mr. Jake said, that the debt to GDP ratio is something that we look at in terms of sustainability. So that is what we're tracking, and that is what we are very focused on.
Yeah, and I mean, that was one of the hallmark fiscal anchors of the Trudeau government, right? And when it was 30.8, it was never going to go higher than that. That was kind of their commitment. And here we are In the table here, it's 41.7, increasing to 43.7. Again, how alarming is that for the average Canadian, for the taxpayer? Because there is only one taxpayer, right?
It should be very alarming, right? These are, I don't know, I think I use the words in French, and which the translators probably got really well, like stupefying, shocking, right? This is not, like, it's not a funny fiscal outlook. It's a really serious fiscal outlook. And we don't lightly use the word unsustainable, right? Unsustainable means you don't have the option of saying, maybe I'll wait a couple of years, I'll see how things go. It means if you don't change, this is done, right? So it's very serious. And I think, as anyone who's managed a household budget knows, if you sit down at the end of the month and you don't have enough money to pay your bills, and it happens month after month after month, you know that something's going to break.
Chilling. Listening to that. Very chilling. And ladies and gentlemen, this is from the financial genius that came in to save us. Anyone starting to feel like the Brits when Mark Carney was head of the Bank of England? Maybe this is what they kind of felt like. Because this is what we're seeing. Now, it's a little different when it comes to countries. Because let's say things get pretty bad and we lose our AAA credit rating. That means it'll drop down to maybe a AA credit rating. What does that mean? Does it mean that we're screwed? Canada can't borrow any more money? No, that's not what it means. What it does mean is that those debt servicing charges, they will go up substantially because it means they're higher risk. So those debt servicing fees, they jump. Maybe they jump to over $100 billion a year, a quarter of the budget. Quarter of the budget. That's insane. Absolutely insane. So, I don't care who you voted for. People were sold that Mark Carney was going to come in with fiscal responsibility, fiscal restraint, cut spending, get Canada on the right track. This guy who works for the Liberal government is saying we are on the wrong track and we must change now. Now. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. And it's chilling hearing him say that.
You were here last week. We focused on infrastructure, so it's only appropriate we pivot back to fiscal matters. So, looking at our current position, we can't look at it in a vacuum. It has to be viewed, I would say, on a comparative basis. So Canada still maintains its AAA credit rating, and its current debt to GDP ratio is, I think, 2.2%. How does that compare to some of our G7 colleagues?
Canada, relative to other countries, is in a more favorable, if you look at the numbers, in a more favorable situation immediately.
Before I let him finish his answer, the person who asked this question is a Liberal. If you hadn't put that together, Liberal. And the Liberals are fishing for any positive talking points they can get out of the PBO. So what do they always lean on when Canada sucks? They say, oh, well, just compare us to other people and you'll see that we're doing a great job. That's what he's going for here. So Jason, interim PBO, says, well, compared to other G7 countries, we're in a favorable position. I bet Vince, the Liberal, wished that his answer ended there. But it didn't.
I would say, like for myself, the analogy is, I don't know, you're 200 pounds overweight and you have 50% body fat, and everybody else in your group, in your weight loss group, has 75% body fat and is like 400 pounds overweight and can't get out of bed. So, yeah, like we're in a more advantageous position, and in many ways, that's the opportunity where we can hopefully move. We have space and time where we can move quickly to rectify the situation.
What an analogy. So we're better off than everybody else, right? Sure. An asteroid's coming. Everybody else is 100 kilometers away from the asteroid. We're 200 kilometers away from the asteroid. It allows us a little bit more time to try and get out of the way. But we're still going to be hit by an asteroid. That's what this is. So it's amazing because the Liberal's trying to get a talking point. The Liberal is trying to steer the narrative here, and the interim parliamentary budget officer just annihilates it. Like, no, you don't understand how serious this is. This is what this means. This is what this means. Like, it's insane to hear this. It's insane to hear one of the government's own employees essentially shredding the government narrative. You don't really hear this. In all committee, we didn't really hear this. It was very, very rare. But we're hearing it now.
So, is that a reflection of the current global economic environment?
Yeah, very much so. The member referred to the work of the International Monetary Fund, and a lot of what the International Monetary Fund has been publishing recently on the fiscal side is advice to all countries to reduce deficits, reduce debt, and batten down the hatches and prepare yourself to make some tough decisions. So it certainly isn't advice to Canada. All other countries, and as I mentioned last week, there are some countries looking at France and looking at the UK where their financial markets are certainly rockier than ours right now, certainly in terms of debt issuance. So relatively speaking, we're in a more favorable position. It, at the same time, doesn't obviate the fact that the path that we're on right now isn't sustainable. And we might have more time than those other countries, but we're going to end up in a very similar place.
If you don't stop what you're doing, and this isn't, he's even saying, this isn't just the Parliamentary Budget Office, this is the IMF, who a lot of countries rely on for standards and fiscal ratings and things like that. They're saying, reduce your debt, lower your spending. What is Mark Carney doing? Increasing spending, increasing debt. So what? He knows something that everybody doesn't? No, you're all wrong. I'm the one who's right. Really? Yeah, this is something. But you just watch the Liberal narrative from this. This is what they're going to say. The Parliamentary Budget Officer was at committee the other day and said that Canada is doing a great job in comparison to its G7 neighbors when it comes to the economy. And that's all thanks to Mark Carney. That's what you're going to hear. Dollars to donuts. That's what you're going to hear.
So, another question, obviously. You project, so we're on a good fiscal path, or we're on a better fiscal path than some of our G7 colleagues, and you project our deficit staying under 2% of GDP and debt holding near the low 40% range. Would you agree that these kinds of thresholds are really, in practice, fiscal anchors that signal some discipline?
Listen to all of that spin. The Liberals just hoping for a yes. Saying, okay, so, you know, the it's going to hold in the low 40%. Hold in the low 40%. When it's increasing from 40% up to 43.7, you can't say that that's holding in the low 40%. That's increasing. So don't even try to spin that, but you're going to. And then even in the beginning, couldn't even help himself. So you're saying we're on a good financial path. Okay, well, better fiscal path than the rest of everybody. Yeah, it's going to take you longer to get to the ditch, but you're still heading to the ditch. This is the spin that you're hearing. It's a cult. And it's frightening to hear. Let's see what he says.
I would go back to one of the comments I made at the outset that, like, the most important word in the release this morning was unsustainable. We didn't choose it carelessly. I've been in the office for 17 years. I was working in the federal government putting together budgets for 10 years prior to that. You got to be you choose these words with prudence and care. And certainly we don't want to be alarmist. And at the same time, the current path we're on in terms of federal debt as a share of the economy is unsustainable.
Wow. Can you annihilate a narrative any more direct than that? The guy was just looking for a breadcrumb, something. Well, we're kind of staying here and we're kind of staying over here, and it's not that bad, is it? It's not that bad. And the guy looks at him and just says, Are you not listening? In our report, we used the word unsustainable. Unsustainable. And then goes to lecture the guy. Like, liberals, are you listening? Canada, are you listening? And if you're watching this, please share this, because CBC's not going to talk about this. CTV's not going to talk about this. The Liberals are certainly not going to talk about this. Canadians need to see this. They need to see what's being said in this committee by the Liberal-owned parliamentary budget officer. He's saying, Canada is on a train. See that canyon over there where the bridge is completely out? Yeah, you're going full speed there.
Coming back to our credit rating. Obviously, it's a fairly internationally recognized standard in terms of how sustainable our fiscal position is. How does that compare to some of our G7 colleagues?
We, relatively speaking, again, similar to the fiscal metrics, we end up being further ahead or closer to the top of the group.
There's your talking point, Liberals. We have a AAA credit rating. We're doing better than all the G7. And they won't mention the rest of it. They will continue lying to Canadians, and they won't mention the rest of it. This is where Canada needs you folks. We need you folks to get this out there.
I guess my last question for you would be, if the government continues on its current spending levels, when do you project the budget to be balanced?
Is that a trick? Is that a trick question? If you have a very long. Again, the current status quo is not. It's not sustainable.
Kelly Block. Kelly Block. I don't think anybody in that room could help themselves, because it's a callback to Justin Trudeau.
And the budget will balance itself.
And Mark Carney is essentially saying, oh yeah, Justin's right. You can spend your way out of a debt. 100% you can. Watch me. So she's like, okay. The genius has spoken. When are we going to see the budget balance? And the guy can't even help himself. He's like, what do you want me to say? This is a trick question. It may not be a trick question, but this is a tricky prime minister, and this is a tricky Liberal government. And they will spin, and they will photo op, and they will jump up and down and say, look at what we've done. And there's a lot of Liberal acolytes that are eating this up. I think that Mark Carney is the best prime minister ever. Meanwhile, nothing has happened. This needs to get out there. The real information needs to get out there. There's a link to the Parliamentary Budget Office report in this video, so you can see that. The link to the committee is in this video. I recommend you watch it. It is 2 hours long. Hopefully after watching this video, it'll give you some context and some understanding as to what they're talking about. So take a look. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the end. This is such an important video because this may have been one of the most important witnesses at committee we've seen for some time. Because I think the Liberals were hoping that this guy was going to come out and validate their entire spending plan. And in reality, he destroyed it.